It's going to take time to earn the trust, to understand what quality outcomes we can drive. There are going to be certain things that we feel, very comfortable making autonomous today. As an example, if you look at customer support today, right, there's a huge amount of that that's really autonomous today. But as you mentioned, inventory replenishment for $10 million, probably companies still want a human in the loop.
Welcome to the Data and AI Chief. I'm your host, Cindi Howson. Agentic AI sounds miraculous, doesn't it? Schedule a meeting for me, replenish inventory, grant credit limits. Maybe this sounds a little scary too. Is our data foundation even ready for this? My guest today is Andi Gutmans, Vice President and General Manager of Data Cloud at Google, where he leads a unified platform of databases and lakehouse technology built to put enterprise data to work through AI agents. In this episode, you'll learn how much autonomy AI agents are really ready for, what's driving the rising token costs, and how to modernize despite the technical debt holding many enterprise organizations back. Andi, welcome to the Data and AI Chief.
Thank you so much for having me.
And where in the world are you joining us from today, Andi?
I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Okay, the Bay Area, and yet you travel the world. You've lived around the world. I think you have such a fascinating background living in multiple countries and working for two big behemoths in the industry. So describe a little bit that background for our listeners and maybe reflect on how much that international background has shaped you for the needs of enterprises today.
If we had AI back in the day, I would say translation and everything would be far easier. But yeah, I actually was born and grew up in Switzerland until I was 10 years old. To a British mother. So I started being Swiss and British. Then I moved to Israel at the age of 10. And about 20 years ago, I moved to the US. So I'm actually quad citizen. I also went to an American high school. But that's really kind of shaped how I think about technology and how technology is actually able to flatten the globe and just help people communicate. And that's something I've been really excited about with AI. I mean, you see some of these advertisements grandparents in China speaking to their kids in the US and they're speaking Chinese and the kids speaking English. That's not science fiction anymore. It works. And so I think it's just been really exciting to see how AI is democratizing communications and, just the opportunity of technology, right, to bring the globe together.
Yeah, for sure. And so you've hit on some of my favorite countries to visit. And also, having lived in Switzerland, married to a Brit, a lot of cultural experiences there. And as I think about AI for communication, it also is trust. We have different laws in each of these countries and world regions. And if you think about some of the headlines of late, some of it's a little scary. An agent deleting a database, a production database nonetheless, or a rogue agent granting credit for millions of dollars. What are your thoughts? Are we really ready for this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I get that question all the time. I think there's a few different parts to that. First of all, there's a perception versus reality. So let me give you an example. If you take a Waymo, you're actually 80% less likely to get into a hurtful accident than if you take a service with a human driver. Still, most people prefer to take the Uber versus the Waymo because there's a sense of security that they feel, right? I actually send my kids with Waymo because I know it's safer. So I think there is one element where, it's going to take time to earn the trust, to understand what quality outcomes we can drive. There are going to be certain things that we feel, very comfortable making autonomous today. As an example, if you look at customer support today, right, there's a huge amount of that that's really autonomous today. But as you mentioned, inventory replenishment for $10 million, probably companies still want a human in the loop. I think there's this huge spectrum of use cases. And what we're going to find over time as quality goes up, as we understand what controls to integrate, right, that we will increasingly feel comfortable having autonomous agents acting on our behalf. And given that also humans make mistakes, right, my guesstimate is we're probably going to get to a higher level of accuracy over time than having an average human practitioner in many, many use cases. But that will take time, and it takes time to build that trust. But we're definitely seeing customers already today deploy these kind of autonomous agents in production and having them take action on the business's behalf. I do want to just touch on one thing you said, which is, deleting a database, which of course I manage a large amount of databases for customers and analytics engines and storage. And I think this is, regardless of whether it's AI or a human error, this is why using a hyperscaler like Google actually is beneficial to customers, because we do have controls in place, right, for soft deletes and other things where we can actually deal with some both human and AI-based errors. Of course, you shouldn't count on it. You should be careful and put your own controls in place. But there's a lot that we do as part of managing your data to make sure that we can try and keep you as secure as possible.
Yeah, so there's a few things that you touched on there, Andi. One, trust. And maybe it's also expectations. So you're trusting the Waymo with your children's lives because humans make errors. We get tired or we get distracted. And then I hope a human is not texting and driving at the same time. But I would also dare say humans are good with complexity. So I actually walk behind the Waymo when I'm in California rather than in front. And if I were in, let's say, Milan or even the downtown streets of Newark, I'm going to want that human who knows all the back roads and can deal with this kind of complexity. So is there any kind of shortcut for when we want humans in the loop versus, no, this is a repeatable process that AI is well suited for?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I don't think there is a magic answer. There's not a one size fits all answer, but in general, assuming that whatever action you want the system to take has some kind of mutating impact on the business or so on, is taking some action on behalf of the business that you think is important, right, that has to be high quality, then usually as a customer, you're going to approach that with care, where one is you're going to have your evals in place where you actually see, okay, am I getting to the quality that I'm expecting? And you may actually start by having a human in the loop initially, just to get that sense that, okay, the quality bar that I'm expecting is being met. And then over time, you kind of open up the funnel and you enable full autonomous action. So I do think, when we go back to trust, a lot of this has to do with baby steps, trying it out, making sure you have the right controls, making sure you're building the right level of confidence, and then also having mechanisms in place that can also detect if the agent is actually not doing what it's supposed to do, right? We can have agents actually scoring agents.
Yeah,
And
supervising other
supervising.
agents. Yeah.
Exactly.
And so you've worked at multiple hyperscalers now, AWS before Google. And one thing our industry is really good at is collecting data. I would dare say 30 years in the space myself, we're not as good at making that data work for us. Are we finally at the point that customers can unlock all that data that they've been capturing? And maybe do you even agree with me that we haven't unlocked it so well until lately?
Yeah. I mean, I think definitely, one is they can unlock all the data. And two is if they want to be successful with AI, they have to unlock all that data. when you think about an enterprise data state, you have a lot of structured data in operational systems and analytical systems. Typically there's a small subset of that that's been curated for analytics and for insights. And so even on the structured side, it's a relatively small subset of data that's truly being analyzed and actioned on. But the more interesting thing is, over 90% of enterprise data is actually unstructured data. It's in images and it's in PDFs, contracts, right? And that has mostly been dark data. That has mostly been data that has not been activated. So we have really, I would say, two opportunities. First, AI is really good at reasoning around this unstructured data. And so we can make 100% of the data state light up. And what that then actually means, which is the second piece, is if you want to build autonomous agents, you can now build agents that can truly get the context of your overall enterprise data state, right? The more your agents can get to data, not only that you as a human could get to, but maybe even surpass what you as a human could actually get to, the more you can have confidence that the agent is actually going to have the right context and is going to drive to the right outcomes for your business.
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack there, Andi. And indeed, 90% of the data is unstructured, dark data, PDFs, network drives, images, voice calls. But I would say that we as an industry have not applied the same data management principles to that unstructured data. So yes, agentic AI, generative AI, now we can get to it, but we're finding a lot of garbage. And my colleague Jane, as I was just there in London last week, she was describing, yes, the volume of PDFs, it'll be policy doc V2 _ use this one latest, which is not a great approach to managing the data. So what do? We're not going to wait to clean everything up. But how do we make sure that we're not making decisions based on old unstructured data and the different versions out there?
I always say that, the old way of doing this failed because you needed data stewards who will basically curate data, make sure to check on data quality, catalog the data, create business glossaries. And so as a result, you only had a very small subset of data that was actually ready to be activated. You just could not throw enough human bodies on the problem, right, to get through the whole data state. The one thing that I would say AI and agents are really good at is actually dealing with this messiness and reasoning around your data state. So we're taking a very different approach, which is saying, we can't solve this with humans. We can't throw 30 FDs on this, to try and curate all your data state. We actually have to build agents that automatically do that for you. As the example you mentioned, which is, in the title, it says, V1 latest use this.
Yeah.
It's a perfect example where, frankly, probably humans would be overloaded with the amount of copies and maybe have 70 copies of the same doc. An agent can actually figure that out reasonably easily. That's the kind of dealing with that messiness AI is really good at. So we think there's a huge opportunity for us here to aggregate all these signals, to enrich all these signals and make them searchable. So we're getting the right context and the right data to AI.
Yeah. And so you mentioned the role of the data steward and the ability of humans versus agents to deal with this messiness. And we know, as Gartner said at their conference this year, context is king. Context is what gives accuracy and trust to these AI agents. How do we ensure that trust is scalable and reusable?
That's a great question. I think we need to come at it from a couple of angles. First of all, we're thinking of two key personas. One is the data steward that ultimately, kind of has to make sure that the knowledge, right, is appropriate for the organization. But as I mentioned before, they can't really deal with that scale. And then the second one is I actually call it the agent persona. The agent that is doing and understanding this, we have to actually think about the agent as its own persona and how do we make sure it can do its job. And so the way we're approaching this is, one, really making sure that we can get that skill and the capabilities of the agent But then we also deliver a human in the loop capability where businesses want to be able to inspect and curate that data. And so this is, you're moving away from this kind of binary decision. And for example, one of the capabilities we can provide is if there's a certain confidence level, then automatically populate that knowledge. If the confidence level may not be as high, have a human in the loop take a look at it. So this will be a journey. It's extremely complex. Anyone who tells you they completely solved it is not telling you the truth. But I think we are very well positioned to solve this for customers because we both have the data and the model capabilities. Most vendors either have data or model, not both. And what they don't realize is you actually have to have both to really get to that high level of accuracy, because it's not just about the context. It's how does the model reason around that context? And you have to iterate on both of those in parallel.
For sure. Yeah. I don't know that anyone's saying they have completely solved it because the rules and the models are changing while we're in flight. So I think it's more how good is any organization at, or how far along are they in their journey? And so maybe let's make this a little real. Can you take us through a customer case study? If you have to anonymize it, that's fine. But what does good look like? Is it a particular use case that they start with, a particular value statement, or is it where their data is ready enough, clean enough?
So it's a good example are customers who've moved from thinking about AI as a co-assistant, co-pilot, to really thinking about AI as autonomous agents who can take action on behalf of the business. So for example, Virgin Voyages, they built over 1,000 autonomous agents that are actually able to take autonomous action on the business's behalf. So for example, if there's a weather disruption, they're actually able to deal with all the inventory rebooking, itinerary rebooking in about 11 minutes. Before that, it took them 6 hours of manual work. They're doing, a lot of personalized email. They're sending a lot of personalized emails to their customers that are hyper personalized, and they're seeing increased revenue as a result. So we're definitely seeing those kind of use cases. In telco, we're seeing customers like Vodafone using agents for autonomous network operations, where they basically have a digital twin of their network. We are able to create the right context, both external context such as weather and other signals, and internal context of their data state, so they can actually have agents that take proactive action on their network. So we're seeing, a ton of these use cases. Now, as I mentioned before, it's a journey for customers on when they turn on the autonomous knob versus the human in the loop. But we're already seeing a ton of use cases where customers feel very comfortable being fully autonomous.
Hi, data and AI friends. We are at a generational shift. Some might even say a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. To capitalize on this opportunity, you need more than just great technology. You need a mindset shift. That's why I'm proud to say that ThoughtSpot sponsors this podcast. Go from raw data to trusted insights and action with ThoughtSpot Agentic Analytics, a platform powered by a suite of specialized AI agents. It's why companies like Cisco, Lyft, T-Mobile, Sephora, and Schneider Electric count on ThoughtSpot. See what the future of analytics looks like at thoughtspot.com. And so if we take your theory of crawl, walk, run, let's maybe break that down further. So maybe rather than if there is a flight disruption, the crawl would be start with a notification to the customer. The walk, auto rebook up to a certain level, and then run, auto rebook everyone, or initiate a phone call, something like that. Did I get that right?
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at, inventory replenishment, right, you could do the same thing, which is like, hey, an alert inventory is low. Do you want me to take action? Number one. Number two is inventory is low. you're willing for the agent to order additional inventory up to $50,000, autonomously. And maybe about $50,000 is human in the loop. So we're seeing customers kind of think through exactly what those thresholds are for a call walk wrong.
Yeah, that's good. Now, if I think about the value of that, the value is customer NPS and therefore the revenue. I will choose loyalty because you rebooked me and I didn't spend
Right.
31 hours in the airport as my colleague Sunny did last week. So that's the real benefit. But we have an odd thing going on, I would say largely in Silicon Valley, about the way they're measuring AI usage is tokenmaxxing.
Yeah.
What do you think of this?
I'm not a big believer in tokenmaxxing. I mean, I understand like the original motivation was to, kind of make sure that the business is, transforming and has all the signals of AI. But actually, the way I think about it and the way we're thinking about the data platform is the best context is the context that drives the outcomes you need with the least amount of tokens and processing.
Efficiency of the tokens, really.
Exactly, efficiencies of tokens. And what we've actually seen is there's lots of ways that we can optimize the context, the model, the harness, so that we're actually driving to higher quality outcomes with less tokens and less tool calls. And so that's, I would say, the really interesting optimization problem that we're focused on. And I think the industry at large is now realizing that to focus on is you ultimately want to measure it in outcomes. For most businesses, outcomes is increased revenue or increased efficiency, and hopefully a combination of both. But it really is about, using the least amount of tokens you need to get the job done, using the least expensive model you need to get the job done. You don't always need the most sophisticated model. It depends on the use cases. A lot of harnesses can actually optimize across models depending on what they're trying to do. And I think that's where there's a huge amount of value right now to be created in the market. And I think customers are also demanding it because they're not willing to pay an infinite amount for tokens and always use the best and the biggest model.
Yeah, and for sure, that's where in our own platform, in the ThoughtSpot platform, we choose the model based on the task at
Exactly.
hand, and because we also own the costs.
Yeah.
So our CFO wants us to be efficient on the operating margins there. But I wonder if this is also the classic case of leading versus lagging indicators. If an organization is saying we have to adopt AI, then how they measure that adoption at first is just using any kind of AI. The lagging indicator is that revenue or that improved customer NPS. Is there any way to shorten that line of sight to the lagging indicators?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think really the initial motivation, right, is just to make sure that people are not afraid of it. They're engaging with AI. They're seeing what it can do for them. So I think it makes a lot of sense for businesses in the very early stages just to say like, hey, go and use it, and then share where you've seen it beneficial. I think a lot of the conversation I have with customers now is, how do they lead by example, right? So that they're also showing that, hey, they're actually getting the benefit. And then how do they start doing internal storytelling, right? Where they actually share the differentiated outcomes they're able to drive. And I think that starts to then create an internal narrative of, okay, it's not only about the usage, but it's usage, but with, plus the outcome. And then, let's start really thinking about our biggest problems potentially have, the highest leverage. And how do we go and think about using AI to go and solve some of those problems?
Yeah, and part of that storytelling, I work with a lot of leadership teams, and I think if the board is saying use AI or else, then they also have to walk the talk.
Yeah.
So maybe do you want to share one thing that you wish boards would start doing to walk the talk and maybe conversely stop doing?
I mean, boards' role is governance. So I think to a certain degree, it's probably more the operational side, like the CEO that probably will set most of the tone for the organization. But I would say that even at the board level, so for example, if you think about a board meeting, right? Um, you know, I remember when I was a CEO, I probably spent like 2, 3 weeks just kind of getting the deck ready, right? And then like you basically have 2 months where you can operate, and then you're back again in the hamster wheel to try and get the next board deck out. So I think one of the things that I'm also doing in my organization is encouraging folks to be a bit more scrappy, to use AI to create those presentations, maybe lower the bar a bit initially, right? It doesn't have to be all perfect. But I think what we're finding is there's a lot of fun in it. People are using infographics now to describe their business. So I think, I think that's probably one element, which is maybe bring a bit more fun into it, you know, give the CEO a bit more latitude and agents, and, in how they deliver the content. And, we're doing that internally also. A lot of our internal content now is generated with Gemini. Even as we do some of our business analysis, right? We're using AI to do that. Also in our finance department, inspiring teams. And I think board members, because they're sitting on multiple boards, right, have an opportunity to bring a lot of these successes, from other companies into, a specific company and actually share those successes.
Yeah, I love that you started with the briefing deck, the board briefing deck and the slides prepared for that, because that's where I say, just say no. At least say no to one page within that deck, that you will have that be a live data feed real time, and people will chuckle at me and say, "Oh, Cindi, it's easy for you to say on the outside in because like I won't get fired for saying no and pushing back." But I think that's a good crawl approach. Just start with one page. The culture has to be there and ready to support sharing the data in real time. I will say with infographics, I have to give a shout out to Notebook LM. Love the infographics that creates. It's very good. But Andi, if we look back, it's kind of easy when you start from a clean data estate and somebody who's gone through full modernization. But the reality is, for many organizations, data is fragmented. It's in multiple databases, multiple lakehouses, sometimes in the cloud, sometimes on premises. How do we deal with that?
And I would say that you just described most of my customers.
Yes, mine
Most of my
too.
customers have, a messy data state. They're multi-cloud, they're hybrid cloud. They've got Oracle, SQL Server, Teradata, BigQuery, Snowflake, you name it. And so I would say that's the norm right now. And we actually think it's an opportunity now. I already mentioned how AI is really good at dealing with messiness. So really, like, this is the time when we can actually bring in a lot of these different data sources, the metadata. We can enrich it. We can understand the relationships between the data. So, really making sure we bring kind of that whole visibility of the data state together. And then we also have open standards like Apache Iceberg that's making it really easy. So we have this whole notion of a borderless lakehouse where you can actually, use your favorite GCP analytics service, but also run it against Databricks on Azure, or running it against Parquet files that are sitting on Amazon S3, and doing that cost effective. Also getting to your SaaS applications like SAP and Workday. So there's, I would say, point in time opportunity now with open standards, and also with how we're thinking about semantics and metadata, to really have an all-up view of the enterprise. This was always a bit of a pipe dream in the past because it required lots of data stewards and other things and federation to make it happen. The nice thing now is we can use agents, we can use open standards, we can use high-speed cross-cloud interconnects that, they're ones where you actually just pay for the capacity and not for the egress cost. And so the whole stack right now is actually ready to tear down these walled gardens that were very hard to tear down 3 to 5 years ago.
Yeah. And I would say it's always been about the price performance trade-off on where you store your data and how open it is to get it into let's say, the next high-performing layer. But Andi, not everyone is equally open, and we're actually seeing some interesting behavior from some of the tech companies getting more territorial. Do you think we're going to keep moving in that direction?
I think you're right. I think, some companies, like for Google, it was always, one of our tenets for cloud was to be extremely open. We obviously see other vendors that are a bit less open. I think customers are demanding it. And the thing is, customers demand it. I think all vendors are going to have to get there. You're seeing that with vendors embracing Apache Iceberg, right? Even though for some vendors, they're probably happier if it's on a different table format, right? But they have to embrace it. Otherwise, customers are just not going to come to their platforms. I think we're seeing this in a lot of other areas. Obviously the knowledge and the semantic models, right? That's something that all companies held very near and dear to their heart. But we are seeing, more and more of these vendors understanding that if they're not open, then customers will basically engineer them out. So I think it's ultimately the customer that ends up setting that tone for vendors. Some vendors come along a bit faster, like us, because for us, this was always a core tenet. Some vendors will take a bit longer, but I have no doubt that that's where we're heading.
Yeah, and I would say to the customers, be bold here. There's some CDAOs I work with, they very intentionally start out with a dual database platform to keep their providers honest.
Yeah.
And they pull the plug when they feel like they're not behaving in the way that maximizes the value over the long term. But Andi, we've covered a lot of ground in the data and AI world. We'll switch to a fun lightning round.
Good.
I understand that when you're not working with data, or maybe your future dream would be to open a coffee shop. What's your signature drink?
Yeah, I'm a hobbyist barista. And I learned most of my barista skills on YouTube. But I have, a great grinder, a great machine. And my favorite drink to make is a flat white. And I can even do a bit of latte art. I can do a leaf, I can do a heart. I'm not quite at the, I would say, professional level, but not too bad. And yeah, I'd love to just have a small hole in the wall coffee shop one day. And, nothing too fancy, but something that just kind of focuses on serving great coffee.
Oh, very nice. Yeah, you're going to have to share a picture of your leaf or your heart. I'm thinking in Mountain View, and now I'm doing a plug, but I love the 1 ounce coffee shop. It's a small barista. They always make it so beautiful. So what is something people would be surprised to learn about your background?
I'm always quite public about myself, so I don't know if there's too much to be surprised about. And probably, I mentioned before that I'm quad citizen. And that's kind of led to me, not being native almost anywhere. I'm actually, I'm not a native of anything. So a lot of folks think I'm Israeli, but if I go to Israel and I speak to people, they'll kind of notice that I'm, not quite native. If I go back to Switzerland, I'm always a bit different. Same in the US. So, what I tell my kids is different is good. Different is interesting. I've always been different no matter where I went. And, that's kind of something that's always been important to me. And it's something that has also made me really appreciate, everyone, because everyone brings their strengths to the table. And I think that kind of, diversity of views, diversity of people is something that I find really exciting.
For sure. How about a book or a podcast that has shaped your thinking?
One of the books that I still cherish a lot, which is a big business book, quite a long time ago, was Blue Ocean Strategy. That really talked about bringing in disruptive products into the market. So Southwest Airlines as an example there. I like to think about that as a framework for what we do, because ultimately, if you want to go and disrupt, it's always some element of more cost-effective, reimagining an experience on a certain dimension, and maybe letting go from the past on certain dimensions that the market doesn't care about that much anymore. So even as we're kind of thinking about, what does a data platform, what's the future look like, and so on, that is one of the frameworks that actually I discuss with my team, because I like the fact that it really makes you think about the customer and how to disrupt on behalf of the customer.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out. We'll link to it in the show notes. And then a final question, Andi. What is something that you've accomplished in the last week that you are particularly proud of?
I did research my background a bit over the past a couple of weeks, and I got some government documents in different languages that I actually couldn't read. And I took that, I was able to use AI to really create an exciting narrative about my family's background that I was able to share with the rest of the family. And it just sparked so much excitement in my family because there were so many things that we actually didn't know that we discovered. And I was thinking about this. If I didn't have AI, this would have not been mission impossible, but this would have probably taken me weeks or months to try and kind of piece all get all the pieces together and actually figure out the timeline and the narrative and get a translator or something. And with AI, it took a few minutes, and I had like a multi-page document that was basically talking about my family's journey. So I think that was a great example of, I think, where, we all talk about also the risks of AI, but this is a great example where AI can do something really special for you that otherwise would have probably just sat on the shelf for a long time.
For sure. And if I'm not going too personal, if you want to share, Andi, so I think your family really fled to Switzerland during World War II. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So my family basically escaped the Nazis in World War II, and we're one of the very few fortunates to make it to Switzerland. And Switzerland wouldn't always accept everyone, but there were certain circumstances why they were actually accepted. They were still, not I would say treated in the best possible way, but they were accepted. And those documents actually shed a lot of light on why they were allowed to stay versus most people who weren't. And so that was just very fascinating. And it's something that, because people at that, from that era didn't really like to talk about things, we really didn't have any information on it. And we finally were able to get, real deep insight into what actually happened at the time. So it was, very emotional for the family, just super exciting.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. Thank you for sharing that with us. And Andi, thank you for being on the Data and AI Chief podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Well, listeners, Andi has given you your playbook for agentic AI success. It starts with a good data foundation, and you don't need to boil the ocean. Take that crawl, walk, run approach. If you enjoyed this conversation, please rate or like it on your favorite podcast platform. And if you would like more inspiration and thought leadership, visit dataandaichief.com or follow me on LinkedIn.